Welcome back to 8 Cubes. After another bout of sickness, we are back with the sickest Marvel Snap information that you need. I'm KMBest. He is Lambie Series. You are watching this on his channel. There are multiple channels on which you can watch this. This is the one on his channel. There will be one on my channel as well every Monday. And of course, once we get back rolling, I'll be having them on Spotify. I've said that 45 times. It's never happened before because we keep getting interrupted in terms of our release schedule. That said, we are here to talk about everything you need to know about Marvel Snap. Let's jump into the first topic, which is Annihilus. Lambie, what you got for me?
So this card, I had like super high expectations for this card because like it's firstly, like I keep saying, it's the boss monster of Clock. And that's what we all assume. And it also, I feel like this card has had potential to really disrupt the game. But of course, with any like new release, sometimes it takes a bit of a while to get the card like in its zone, get the card
Yeah.
in the right deck, right? So I think currently there hasn't really been any like perfect Annihilus shell yet, but I do see a severe uptick of like people trying clock decks or like small I call it the small junk package. But yeah, people have had a severe uptick in trying out a small junk package in many different decks, and I think it's good for the game. It's just that I think like it's one of those cards that it's a lot difficult to optimize, a lot more difficult to optimize than I initially thought. Even for myself, I found it like maybe because I'm quite a perfectionist, I was like really trying to make this card work in many like different decks, and I realized that it's not easy because like the card is good, but it actually takes quite a bit of a build around. And like, so at the end of the day, is the card actually good enough because you need to build around it, or is it just like you need too much effort to build around it, so maybe it's not that good, you know? So what do you think, KMBest?
There are two things I want to touch on. First of all, there's nothing wrong with playing with a small junk package. Second of all, I mean, like, look, everyone's got to get it done, right? Okay. Second of all, I think that it is. I think when you phrased it as boss monster, that was actually quite helpful to me, right? Because when you think about other archetypes, right? Because like the boss monster terminology is something I'm sort of familiar with from Yu-Gi-Oh, right? But it's not the boss monster that makes the deck good. The boss monster is like, there's a lot of boss monsters, but what makes the deck good are the staples, the bread and butter, the stuff the rest of the deck is doing, right? And I think that applies to Marvel Snap a little bit in the sense that, like, when you look at a deck like Loki, the boss monster in Loki is like, the Collector, maybe? Werewolf by Night, maybe? But the boss monster in the archetype is actually like Devil Dinosaur, right? That's a deck that doesn't even really have a boss monster. It like builds up some monsters, but it doesn't have like one big card that you actually have to play. You look at something like Destroy, the boss monster is null, but the reason the deck works is Deadpool. It's the staples that make the deck. And I think that that is an interesting point here because junk as an archetype has just way worse staples than basically any other archetype, right? Like the cards that make junk good either don't work with Annihilus in the case of the goblins or aren't necessarily really all there yet, right? Like there are cards like, Selene that have been data mined that might be pretty interesting for the archetype as far as Annihilus goes, but like junk stuff specifically has some pretty bad staples, which is why I think the best way to use Annihilus is in that small package. Use it with Sentry, use it with the Hood. That's really all you need. And that is how I have done my Annihilus deck building. This brings us to an issue with the way Marvel Snap is sort of structured, which is when a new card comes out, it gets to a point where the more popular it is, the more countered it is. And so you look on the stats website and every Annihilus deck is absolutely terrible because people are playing a bunch of Annihilus decks to figure out how good they're going to be. And then there are people who are just like, I'm going to feast on the Annihilus decks. I think with Annihilus specifically, the way he counters himself is much more pronounced than the way other cards may counter themselves, right? Like if you're playing a Dakin deck versus a Dakin deck, you're both kind of doing something similar. It's not a direct counter. That is true for most of these kind of decks, right? Like, but with Annihilus, it's like, one of you is going to win real big, and it's going to be the one who draws the Annihilus. It's almost like original Loki in that sense, where it's like, what matters in the mirrors is just, did you draw it? And I think that has made Annihilus look and feel worse than he perhaps is.
Yeah, I think so far from my testing, like you said, because it's like new card syndrome, right? So
Yeah.
everybody is playing the card, or those people that really want to climb ladder or whatever, or conquest, they're trying to feast on the card. So, I think as much as I want to say that I've tested the card a lot, I feel like it's also not super accurate testing because
Yeah.
certain archetypes and certain cards can only like succeed if the meta goes a certain direction, right? Like let's just like randomly throw it out, like maybe like a Darkhawk deck is better in like a Thanos based meta because Thanos just naturally fails versus Darkhawk. But like for Annihilus, I feel like it probably suffers also a little bit from the fact that like the best decks run like Hawk, not Hawk, run like Falcon and Beast stuff,
Yeah.
which is very naturally predatory for like the junk related stuff, right? And like you said, the mirrors as well. The Annihilus mirrors are quite toxic, honestly, because like you said, whoever gets to pull up final Annihilus just sends everything over, which is like, well, unless you can like fully clock them before they even get to play the Annihilus,
Yeah.
but that's like a technicality. So I feel like, yeah, I agree, Annihilus might be a better card if people forget about Annihilus.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, like if the meta shifts away from Annihilus, away from Loki, towards more of like Thanos playing stuff on the board, maybe Patriot, maybe like just playing normal cards, suddenly one random Annihilus deck will sweep a huge tournament. I don't know, because no one remembers it exists, right? But if everybody like remembers Annihilus exists, it's like the general nature of clock decks, like in tournaments and on ladder. Like if you don't know it's a clock deck, you get randomly clocked on one lane on ladder. But in a tournament, if you know it's a clock deck, you know how to not get clocked as badly. And I feel like
Right.
Annihilus suffers from this very heavily because the whole game plan is more or less to like make your opponent unable to play cards. But if they know you are trying to make them unable to play cards, like you can really play around that, and like that's a disadvantage for the Annihilus deck from the get go.
Right. That's why I think the small package is the successful one right now. Not just because it's hybridized with a good package of cards in terms of the Wolf Bounce stuff, but because it's the one that is not invested only in having one game plan. Like it doesn't have to be
Yes.
hybridized with Wolf. That's just a good thing to hybridize it with. But you got to hybridize it with something because you're a one
Mm-hmm.
trick pony if you don't. And so just playing like value Annihilus, where he's just like, I'm sending a sentry thing over. Enjoy that, right? Like that's just enough. That's good enough. And you need to not invest too heavily in it, because if you invest too heavily in I'm never going to let my opponent play anything, that is very easy for them to play around. So Loki's still great. Thoughts on that?
Surprise. I mean, yeah, it comes as a huge surprise. No, not at all. It's a completely non-surprise that Loki is still very likely the best deck in the game. And my personal opinion, like amongst good players, it's the weapon of choice for most of us. Because the thing about the Loki deck that has not changed, firstly, nothing has really been done to Loki since, like, I mean, technically they did make Mobius useful again, but not very useful. So, yeah, nothing really has been really done to the Loki archetype. And honestly, it kind of got a bit better, firstly because like we mentioned, the whole like Falcon and Beast thing is becoming more standard, and well, the fact that that's more standard, it means Annihilus is also a bit hurt. But even without that, I feel like the flexibility of the Loki archetype has not changed. If you are really invested in the game, Loki is a deck for you for sure, because you benefit off of knowing the game well. And I feel like it's just that kind of deck, right? Like it's gonna sound so like philosophical or whatever, but the deck literally grows with you. Like it literally grows with you. Like the better you get, the more you understand the game, the more you are able to like make the deck work because you understand your opponent's game as well. So like the deck cannot really get worse other than like maybe nerfs or buffs to some significant things in other archetypes. But like this is really one of those decks that I feel like I've played so many decks in Marvel Snap, but this is the one deck that I feel like I can win any game as long as I know what they are playing. You know, like you just like kind of figure out the game plan and then you go from there. And then because like the fact that Loki is so flexible, you can play their cards, you can play your cards, you can like clear space on the board, make cards cheaper, powerhouses like Wolf and Collector. It's like flexible game plan, good hard carries, and generally just a good engine. Like it has everything. So I don't see I don't see that this is going anywhere without like significant nerfs or buffs to the meta game.
Yeah, like I think the issue Loki has is that it tends to just be good with whatever the most efficient shell is, right?
Yes.
And we're going to touch on that in our next segment, which is on the bounce shell. That is, of course, the traditional, Falcon, some one drops, Nico, Werewolf. That's the core. Beast can end up in or out. I think the only time he's really out, though, is in the Loki decks. Black Widow, again, in or out, but only ever really out in the Loki deck. So, if we're being super honest, it's kind of just Loki's bounce shell and then everyone else's bounce shell. Because everyone else is running pretty much the same things. It's like Forge, maybe a Spider Ham, maybe a Nico Minoru, definitely a Nico Minoru, the Hood, Beast, Falcon, Werewolf, Black Widow, and like probably Shadow King counts as part of this core, and that's like 9 cards right there. And Loki is deviating from that by running different one drops because it wants the one drops that put cards in your hand. It doesn't want Beast as much as the other ones, and it has no use for Black Widow, but honestly, you probably could get away with it. And that is pretty much where we're at here. The main driving force behind this is Werewolf by Night. This is the new, I would say, remember about a month ago where everyone was playing Elsa and Jeff
Yep.
and Kitty. It's that. It's that now, except instead of a bunch of Series 5 cards, it's, wait, hold on, I'm checking my notes here. Werewolf by Night and Nico Minoru. So a bunch of Series 5 cards. And that is like the baseline, just good card shell. It's not to say everything else is unplayable. I don't think that it is. But it is just sort of the easiest way to make a good deck is to use the remaining 3 slots on whatever the spice is, and then just be like, oh, look at my Annihilus deck. I did that on Twitter. I did that. Dara's Darkhawk Gladiator deck. It's like, oh, look at my Gladiator deck. And it's like, yeah, I mean, yes, it is a Gladiator deck, but also like
Yeah,
it's pretty
also.
hard to go wrong in the bounce shell. And that is definitely probably the most notable meta development that we've had.
Yeah, so this Werewolf by Night development has been like, it's like Werewolf by Night just opens up so much like playability for so many other cards that didn't really used to see play. Like one cost cards, right? One cost cards, like, okay, we all know one cost cards on curve are good, but like now one cost cards are like in overdrive because firstly you get to bounce them, on review effects go crazy. Like, you know, the amount of times that like you get insane bursts of stats with Forge. Like Forge like being played multiple times with like the double up effect of Nico, just randomly buffing random things. Like Forge and Nico together are
Nico,
like some
dude.
in
Like,
yeah, it's crazy. It's so much stats, and like we talked about the Loki like deck previously, right? Like the amount of games you win by, it used to be like draw Loki, win, don't draw Loki, maybe lose. Now the amount of games you win by not even drawing and playing Loki
yeah.
now is crazy. Like you actually actively choose to sometimes not play Loki because you want to bounce stuff and then hold on to your shank so you can shank someone and you already have like about 10,000 stats. So like because of
Yep.
the bounce stuff. So yeah, okay, just want to go a little bit back to but like the bounce, shall we? I know one of your favorite cards, which is pa- not really something you really want to bounce, but I know you like Spider Ham a lot.
I like
In
him a
recent
lot
times.
right now. Yes.
Yeah.
Like the
Okay.
Spider Ham right now is mirror tech for other Annihilus type bounce decks in that. And he also, of course, is phenomenal with Shadow King. So, like, most of
Mm-hmm.
the time when I'm playing a Spider Ham, I'm looking to hit like one of 4 cards, basically. And they are a tech card. So, like Shadow King or Shang-Chi that's going to be sitting in your hand. They are something like Annihilus and something like Loki. And, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
matchup, I'll play it on the turns where I can try to hit that stuff as much as I can. Specifically, Spider Ham is so phenomenal in this sort of Annihilus wasteland that we're in because it
Mm-hmm.
is the only way you actually have to guarantee that you can win the Annihilus war. If you hit an Annihilus with Spider Ham, you're so, so, so far ahead, it's honestly not even funny.
Agreed.
Lockdown shells have been making a bit of a resurgence recently as they are quite good against any kind of deck that wants to play like Sentry into Annihilus. You just slam down that Professor X on the Sentry lane. They look like a complete idiot. And that is sort of how the lockdown shells tend to function. Where are you at with lockdown in Marvel Snap right now, Lamby?
So when I thought of this topic, I wanted to talk about general like just like Storm, Professor X, whatever. But I suddenly thought of something which is quite funny. Recently, there's this thing popping out on my streams. People keep telling me about magneto control. They keep telling me about magneto control being a
Yeah.
meta-defining force. So it's basically like Zabu, Storm, and then you get to play like Jessica Jones or Rescue
Yeah, I
and
did a
like
video on this. I know what you're
Enchantress.
talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hilarious because like people have been memeing about it right now, like, oh, Magneto controls the deck that Lambie never noticed that was winning everywhere. Then I'm like, where is this winning everywhere?
It's
but,
winning
but no,
everywhere except you've never played against.
yeah, except like the person that's super in touch with tournaments has never heard of it. But
Yep.
okay, but anyway, so the funny thing is anyway, so this I've been playing a lot of Storm recently now. Just cause that I feel like being able to like actually started expecting like Storm Jessica Jones. Like Storm Jessica Jones actually is quite legit. Like it's a
Yeah.
lot of points. And then you fill it up with like Miss Marvel or Doom. Miss Marvel and Doom is literally two Doctor Dooms a lot of the time, which is like
It
so
is.
much stats, right? Like you play like 4 cost Doctor Doom, then you play Prof, or you play like something like a Gamora, which is huge, especially if one lane is down. Then you play your real Doctor Doom. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of like lockdown strategies because it feels like firstly it doesn't really let you play the game. Secondly, it's quite linear, but it's working. Like it's actually working right now because like firstly, your rescues and your Jessica Jones can't be shanked no matter what, right? They can't even be shanked. And then the power of I feel like outside of specifically no, so this is the funny thing, right? Even if you curve very nicely with a wolf bounce, like the wolf jumps out of the storm lane
Yes.
very often. So
Yes.
it's kind of weird because you can have all the perfect stats, perfect curve, but your best curve actually clears you out of the storm lane, sort of. So it's a bit weird, like it's a bit
So
weird. And I think maybe that's why lockdown is decent right now as
there's a
well.
couple specific things that I think you're touching on that are correct. The first is Storm. I don't know if you remember this, but the last time Bounce was good, Storm was really good into it, right? Like it was
Yes.
it was the one I thought was a little bit scarier than Wave, because Wave you could play around. Storm really restricts your ability to bounce. That remains true. One of the issues though with Storm is that a smart Loki player will just be like, okay, I'll collector you there on 4. And it's just like,
Mhm.
I've immediately died. Like, if they
Yeah.
get a collector on the Storm lane, it's just like, oh, I lose the entire game. And even if they don't get a collector on the Storm lane, like, it's still a little bit difficult to win the other lanes some of the time because of the way that thing scales up. So Wolf, yes, it is good against, but specifically Loki, with the ability to get the collector and then play the card Loki and then play a bunch of your cards, it's like, okay, well, I invested really heavily in winning that Storm lane, and then they collector Loki'd me. So either they have a collector on the Storm lane and they're beating my ass, they have a Snowguard Hawk that lets them play onto the Storm lane and they're beating my ass, or they have all of my cards and they're beating my ass because I invested turn 3 and turn 4 into that Storm lane. And it's like, it's good against, I think, every other bounce deck. Does that make sense? Like every other bounce deck, it's like, okay, yeah, no, Storm is a legitimately awesome play, one of the best things you could be doing. And then against Loki, it's like, I see I have lost to the fact that you played the card Loki. And like that, it's so close, right? Like I think the archetype would really be
Yeah.
forcing a meta movement if it weren't for Loki, which is just good
Yeah,
enough
I think
anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think the presence of the collector going crazy is one of the reasons why Loki doesn't hurt as much
Yeah.
from like the whole storm related stuff. But yeah, no, I feel like lockdown decks in general are quite well positioned now. And like I
Yeah.
think one point you mentioned that I think is very real is that like in the past, even in the previous like iterations of wave whereby like bounce decks can just spam everything on 5, right? Dodge the previous old wave. Storm is more like it comes down on 3, and then no matter how much you can like spam, you can't spam as much on 3 as on 5,
Correct.
right? Because of just of energy efficiency and stuff like that. So it was easier to lock out with Storm, I feel. So as much as I'm not the biggest like lockdown fan, I think it's well positioned now, and Miss Marvel really pushes it over the top. It's really like 15 extra stats. It's so much. So
She's
that's why I still
very
have
good.
Rogue in some of my bounce decks as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other Miss Marvel deck. That'd be Darkhawk mid-range. It doesn't have to be a Miss Marvel deck. I've seen plenty of builds that are not necessarily Miss Marvel. We've got hybridized Annihilus stuff, but mostly you're interested in running a 415 when you can. And Darkhawk mid-range is in this weird position where it's like, I should lose to Loki, right? And then like sometimes you just don't because of the amount of disruption inherent in your strategy, Black Widow, Korg, Rock Slide, you just end up preventing them from doing anything. And any deck that's got like, I don't know, like a 40% chance to just be like, yeah, you're not playing Loki this game, is pretty okay. I think there's something to be said for that kind of curve. Whenever I try Darkhawk, it feels sort of mid, right? Like, not to put too fine a point
Yeah.
on it. It's just like it's good, but it's not great, and it feels like a classic tier 2 deck, but it's still good. Like, it's definitely not like you're throwing when you play Darkhawk. You climb to very high ranks with it, I think.
Yeah, the thing about Darkhawk is like I feel like it can never really truly leave the meta. I mean, at least now anyway. Like even without Thanos, even with Thanos like obliterated, I still don't think Darkhawk will like really ever leave the meta because firstly, you are playing cards on curve that disrupt your opponent's deck, right? Like you play Corks, you play Rockslide, you play Widows. These cards don't really cost you, don't really have much opportunity cost because they come down early. They're actual like decent amount of like early stats, and they also put rocks or stop your opponent from drawing, which maybe hampens their game plan. So like you said, like if they don't get to draw or play the Loki instead and they get a rock, right? Your early game already has like profited. You have benefited from the early game, and Darkhawk himself. Honestly, it versus most decks, like a 4-8 on the
Yeah.
final turn is also huge. 4-10. 4-10 is actually sometimes bad, but like a
Yeah.
4-8 is like decent enough, and you've like maybe disrupted their early game. Darkhawk also like I feel you can run. Okay, the thing is because Mobius is like not there, right? So Zabu actually stonks up right now. I've seen so much more Zabu recently than in the last 2 months. And I think like people might have forgotten the fact that Zabu is like one of the OG OP energy cheaters, right? Like he's still pretty good. He lets you play 2/4 cost cards on turn 3, turn 6. Sorry, he lets you curve like 2 into 3, 2 into 4 into 4, and like on turns 3 and 4. Like the resurgence of Zabu, I think has really something that I didn't expect to really see, but I guess because Mobius really didn't do like anything, so Zabu is back, and like that opens the way for Darkhawk mid range to potentially thrive a little bit. I won't say thrive, but like do decent things. And one of the other builds of Annihilus that I've seen, haven't really tested yet, but like I've seen some like Zabu Man Thing Luke Cage Darkhawk package with Annihilus and junk stuff, because Man Thing kind of like really hurts when you give them rocks and
Yeah.
hoods, and assuming they don't have Luke Cage. So yeah, so I think that's something to be explored. Maybe that's like another small junk package idea you can splash in, which is with the Darkhawk mid range deck.
Well, everyone loves a small junk package.
Indeed.
Let's talk about the vaunted counter to Annihilus that we've been referencing this whole time, and
Yeah.
that is Destroy. And I mean, like, it's not like you free win against Annihilus decks, but basically, the more invested they are in putting goblins on your side of the board and doing things like that, the better you are at beating the hell out of them. Now, this is sort of a big reason why I went for like a hybrid werewolf type plan in my Annihilus deck, because the more you invest in it, the worse your matchup is against Destroy, the more annoying the Annihilus mirrors are, the less you invest in it, you can actually just play a normal game against them. Now, Destroy has more or less remained the same, but there's been some sort of fluctuations at the top end that I've noticed. Like, basically, you put together the same 12, but I've seen people running America Chavez in order to accelerate their Deadpool and their X23 into their opening hands, which is kind of important for the deck to function. I've seen people going between Taskmaster and Arnim Zola. There's like fluctuations in like the last 3 slots in the deck, I think, and I'm interested to know where you're at with the archetype.
Yeah, the whole Taskmaster and Zola thing is very interesting for me. Also, I want to throw Hulkbuster into the head as well, into the pool as well, because some people decide to actually go Hulkbuster instead of like of Taskmaster and Zola. And I think it's also very viable. It's just that out of all these 3, I think the easiest one to like utilize is definitely Taskmaster in my opinion. Because
Correct.
firstly, for Zola, I feel like firstly things have to go perfect. You actually really need X23 to make Zola even decent, right? Like on the turn, like you need to actually have an early X23, because like at the end of the day, firstly it's very difficult to get a clear lane for Zola on exactly turn 6, because like Wolverines will be on the board, random other cards will be on the board, X23 will be on the board. So Zola is a bit riskier, and a lot of the games that I think that you can win with Zola, I think you would already be winning if you just played Taskmaster as well. Obviously outside of the obvious one, which is like locked locations. I think locked locations are something that Zola really allows you to win. But like I think the downside is way bigger than playing like Taskmaster, because like Taskmaster lets you win the weird. Okay, it wins you the good games very relatively easily, but it also wins you the weird games. Like if you don't open Deadpool and you have to like Venom a whole bunch of stuff on turn 4, then you can play Taskmaster on 5, Death on 6. Like it wins you the weird games as well. So I feel like Taskmaster is slightly more flexible. Also, when it comes to America Chavez, it's really interesting. But this is that one deck that I don't think I can play Chavez in good faith, because like I really spent so much time testing this deck, right? Because I really wanted to like optimize it, and I could never find a way to fit the Chavez because the deck is so tight. Like you want maximum destroy effects, you want Nico, obviously, you want Deadpool, you want the Now and the X23. You can say you don't want the Wolverine, but at the end of the day, the Wolverine is like a lot of stats as well. So I really cannot find a way to fit
I've got
Chavez in this deck.
I've got a dumb idea for you.
Okay.
Can we get Werewolf in here? There's like 10 on
yeah.
reveals. There's like 10 on reveals in this deck.
Yeah, there's Forge, right? There's even Forge.
Yeah,
So Forge
like
Nico.
there's like they're Forge Nico, right? We're missing Deadpool X23, but there's Forge Nico. There's all the destroy cards. Like, can we be a werewolf deck? Are we interested in that? It's just something that's been rattling around in my brain. I think I saw Revis do it with like Gladiator, and ever since then I've just been thinking like, wait a minute, can we just like jam this in the Deadpool deck too? Is there a way to make that work? Like I
mean, if you wanna do this, you probably play Yondu because it's cheap. Like on review, you probably want to go for the Hulkbuster instead of. Actually, no. Maybe you go for Taskmaster because you can copy Werewolf. Like it's.
Can we play
It's
Beast?
it's like a thing. Sorry.
Can we play Beast?
No, because most of your one cost die.
Zero cost Deadpool would be pretty sick though.
That's true, that's true. But it's like you need to pop stuff first. And then like once those stuff are popped, you don't really want to bounce the big guy. Okay, I guess you sometimes want to bounce Venom to eat another thing, but
I know I'm just thinking about stuff. Like, is that a thing that makes any sense? It's just something that's been rattling around in my brain for a little bit. So
I
now
think it's a bit out there. But
yeah, now it can rattle around
possible.
in someone else's brain. Enjoy.
Yeah.
I think that last suggestion really drives home the point of this final segment, which is it really sort of feels like the meta has stagnated, and I think a lot of that can be laid at the feet of Loki. When we came up with this segment, it was literally because Lambie was saying, dude, I don't know what to talk about. It's the same. So I'm just going to let you take it from here. Tell us how it's the same. Tell us.
Right. So it's been a while since I found like stuff to be the same. Like by that, what I mean is that usually there's like a new thing that like rattles the game. But honestly, in the last 1 month, like even this Marvel's release, Miss Marvel, Gladiator, and now Annihilus, right? I found it difficult to find like joy in competing with anything other than Loki personally, because like it's so far ahead of the curve. Like you guys know that every single video we say a little bit about Loki, but like this one is really just saying that like me being the super tryhard, super playing best decks person is trying to say that I think we are supposed to be done with Loki by now. Like I really think like I'll be completely frank with you, I have enjoyed it. I have casted a lot of Loki. I've won a lot with Loki. I have like played a lot of Loki. And I like playing and doing the best thing. But this best thing is, I think, for too much longer. Like it's too long. Like I think Second Dinner did try and hope that the Mobius like return of Mobius would be their like that would be like their weapon against Loki, right? They thought that it would be the thing that could work, but it didn't work. Nothing worked. And I think Loki is in a spot whereby I know the casual player base like on Twitter and like on like Discord has been like super fed up with Loki. Some have been memeing about the fact that like it's either Loki or bust kind of thing. But like I do agree, it's really at the highest level, it's really Loki or bust, because I know players that play the deck so well, and they also complain to me that like, oh, this is so tiring to do because it's the same Loki thing again. So just disclaimer, like I love best decks. I love Loki. I think it's a great deck, but it's time for it to go. Even from me, I think it's time for there to be a change in the guard. I don't really care what it is, but I want to play a new best deck.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really getting us here is that like, okay, so a new card comes out and it's like, all right, well, what tier 2 strategy will this enable, right? Like that's what this is. Like these are cards that would be tier 1 if Loki didn't exist. I shudder to imagine, right? And so it's like a new card comes out, and the question is either A, does it go with 9 of the cards that go in Loki? Or B, what tier 2 deck does it create, right? And like that's just not a good space for it to be, especially when there are cards like Miss Marvel who are very, very strong and very, very good and can shine on their own. Even cards like Werewolf, right? Like people are like, oh, it's the Werewolf, but like honestly, I think Werewolf's better than Loki. It's just it's also best with Loki, and so it's like this awkward situation where the Loki package is so flexible that it can kind of go with whatever you want it to go with. And I find it hard to believe that they could release a card strong enough to make it not relevant. Like they have to do something about it.
Yeah, I just suddenly thought of this meme. You need to help me here because like, I don't really know
Okay.
the card. Like it's a Magic the Gathering thing. Like you
Mhm.
know, there's this thing. Like I saw it. They keep saying what dies to this card. This deck
Dies to
or like new card.
Doomblade.
Yeah, dies to Doomblade. Yes, yes, yes. So basically, Loki is like the dies to Doomblade, right? Like new
It no
card.
no
Okay,
no no
so
no no. Okay, so hold on. I gotta explain the context of this one. Dies to Doomblade is like it's a joke. It's not a
okay,
serious like because Doomblade is a card that
okay,
just
okay,
like kills a creature, right? And
okay.
so Dies to Doomblade is like, oh well, you can't play any creature that doesn't do an on reveal because it'll die to Doomblade, and that's a free trade for them, right?
Ah,
So like the joke is you could just
okay,
never
okay.
play any creature, right? Card is unplayable, dies to Doomblade. It's true, which is why so many Magic cards have been focused on like abilities that trigger when cast or when entering the battlefield,
Right, right.
so they don't
Understand.
get immediately efficiently removed by whatever the removal is. Doomblade here is just like a stand-in for removal. So, like, the magic analogy for Loki would be like Oko, Thief of Crowns, who was this like massively undercosted planeswalker from like 2019, 2020, I think. And he got released, and basically every single deck that was in any way relevant would play him. And he got banned like basically like basically as fast as you can. So I think that's the
Okay.
analogy for like it's just a card where it's like, oh, we did something wrong here in the design process. With Oko, I believe what it was they changed one of his abilities to be like effectively free instead of costing any resources. And I think that's sort of like where Loki is at, where it's like just late in the design process, they just like were like, all right, this looks
Yeah.
good, we'll ship it. And then they shipped something that's just like fundamentally not an okay thing to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of card design related stuff like broken card interactions when I play other games as well, like Yu-Gi-Oh or like whatever. Like it's like it looks great on paper. It looks like it's gonna like make a cool thing going for the players, and then someone just makes it over busted. They just
Yeah.
like discovered like a more powerful interaction that everyone realizes also that like, hey, this is just a better thing to do. And
Yeah.
Loki right now is really that deck, right? Like it's just a better
Yes.
thing to do compared to everything. And
Yes.
like I can feel it now. As much as I'm such a positive mental attitude person when it comes to metas and stuff, right? I can actually feel that like this Loki meta has gone on for too long. So I do think that change is deserved to be coming, hopefully coming at all.
And on that note, we will leave you for the next one. You can catch it on my channel, KMBest in a Snap. This is KMBest for Lambie series and 8 cubes. Signing off. Take us out, baby.
If you like what you just saw, do follow, like, subscribe below. Thank you so much for being here. See you guys in the next one.